As I said, Mr. Holmes, nothing's been touched. Holmes took an initial sweeping glance around the carriage interior, then stooped to pick something up from the floor. This brown paper, I presume the wrapping for the guard Lyons's sandwiches. Yes. This is can of tea? Yes. Curious. That he had a can of tea? No. Curious that a man under stress should be so painstakingly tidy. I don't understand, sir. Never mind. What do you make of this, Hopkins? Holmes had picked up from the corner a loop of scarlet fabric, silken and ruffled. I don't know, Mr. Holmes. I was completely baffled by it. It seems to be a small decorative item of some sort from a lady's wardrobe. A hair tie, I should think, I said. How might it have got here? I don't know, Doctor, I'm sure. But I suppose it's theoretically possible that someone might have concealed herself in another carriage. Holmes had put the object to his nose. There is a perfume to it, he said, but faint, as though it had not been worn for some time. Could it belong to the thief? I asked tentatively. Possibly, said Holmes, though I think that might have been a thief too many. He stooped to replace the scarlet fabric on the floor of the carriage. I think we are close to a conclusion, Watson. Hopkins, I should like to talk to the guard Lyons again, and to the driver and his fireman. Please make sure that there is at least one other police officer present, and we must be sure to invite Mr. Benedict Masterson to our little denouement, since he's been kind enough to pay the fee for this investigation. By the time Masterson arrived, the clock was approaching 9, and we sat in the old mess-room bathed in dingy yellow gaslight. The rain rattled ceaselessly on the roof and windows, and, when we were all assembled, the 3 weary railwaymen, along with Benedict Masterson, Inspector Hopkins, a junior officer, and Holmes and myself, the gathering became hushed and expectant. Masterson said, "Well, this has certainly been a baffling business, Mr. Holmes, but I assume we're here because you've picked up some clues along the way. You are certainly a man equal to his reputation, sir. The inspector mentioned a red silk trinket of some sort." "Yes," Holmes said. He produced the item from his pocket. "This piece of perfumed fabric. The clear message is that someone was concealed in the carriage with the bullion." "I see. And moreover," I put in, "that the concealed person was probably female." Masterson appeared a little shaken. "Female, you say? Oh, dear." "If I may," said Holmes, "we will return to that later. Mr. Lyons, let us revert for the present to the subject of your sandwiches." "My sandwiches again, sir?" "Indeed. The sandwiches you took on board the train last night, together with the seed cake and the can of cold tea. You say you ate them just before you fell asleep." "Yes, sir." "You ate the sandwiches and the cake, you dozed off, you woke up again, and the gold was gone." "Yes, sir. That's how it happened." "And when you came round and realized the gold had gone, you say it was like a nightmare." "Yes, Mr. Holmes." "You were very agitated?" "I certainly was. Too agitated, I expect, to sweep the floor of the carriage." "To what, sir?" "I presume you did not sweep the floor of the carriage at that point, in that disturbed state." "No, sir, I didn't. With respect, sir, that's not my job." "Quite. I wouldn't expect you to, which makes it very difficult to explain why, when I examined the guard's coach this afternoon, I found not a single crumb on the floor. Now, can anyone here tell me how it's possible to eat several sandwiches and a slice of seed cake without dropping a single crumb? Or, come to that, a single seed?" "I promise you, sir, what I said about my supper was true. I remember exactly what I brought and exactly what I ate." "I have no doubt of that, Mr. Lyons." "Then what, sir?" "My point is merely that you were obviously not in coach 13 when you ate the sandwiches." "On my honour, Mr. Holmes, I swear I was." "Oh, you were in a carriage, certainly, but you were not in the carriage in which your sandwich wrapper was found. The coach where you ate your supper, the coach with the bullion, never made it to London." "Mr. Holmes, this is Confusing, began Masterson. Holmes interrupted. On the contrary, Mr. Masterson, it's very clear. The coach containing the gold was uncoupled from the train when it stopped for water, run into a siding by those awaiting it, and unloaded of its cargo at their leisure during the night. It was a perfectly dark night. There was no moon, so the railwaymen, as Mr. McGlinchey here has recently confirmed, could, from the water pump, see nothing of what was going on at the back of the train. "But, Mr. Holmes," said Inspector Hopkins, "the Bad Luck Special has 13 coaches. Everyone knows that. And you will no doubt yourself have noted that we passed through exactly 13 coaches in our inspection of the train this afternoon." "Oh, it has 13 coaches now, of course, Inspector," Holmes said. "And it only struck me after we had left Bristol and its pleasant station-master Willets that he had described to us in detail his whole engagement with the loading of the gold and the departure of the train without once mentioning that he'd counted the coaches before the train left. The fact is, he didn't count them. He didn't think he needed to. The Bad Luck Special had always consisted of 13 coaches. He wasn't to know that your accomplices at Bristol had added an additional coach to the train before it was attached to the coach carrying the boxes. A coach with its seats stripped out to make it practically identical to the bullion car. On that one night, the Bad Luck Special had not 13, but 14 carriages. When the train stopped to acquire water, it simultaneously shed a coach, and it very nearly, he continued, turning back to Lyons, shed a guard, too. You're a very fortunate man, Lyons." "I don't feel fortunate, sir." "Your good fortune is that you are still alive, and that in turn is because you were fortunate enough to fall asleep. Imagine if you had not. The train stops. The thieves uncouple the rear coach with yourself inside it. As soon as you see them, you become a risk to them. There's no telling what they might have done. What I believe actually happened was that as they were releasing the carriage from the train, someone noticed that you were asleep inside. They took the opportunity to move you into the next coach, along with your tea can and sandwich wrappings. You may be thankful you did not wake at that moment." Masterson wore an expression of amazement. "I am full of admiration, Mr. Holmes, but at the same time, I feel somewhat desolated. This clearly means that someone in my organization has betrayed me." "Which brings me back to the ring of scarlet silk discovered in the carriage, certainly an intriguing adornment to the problem," said Holmes. "It could indeed signify the presence of a woman." "But there is the mystery," I said, "of how she got there or what she might have done." "I think, however," said Holmes, "that is a mystery with a simple solution." At this point Masterson appeared rather tragically stricken. "You're thinking—" "Yes," said Holmes. "You're thinking that my estranged wife, Laura— Dear God, that foolish woman—" "Oh, come along, Mr. Masterson. You know full well your wife had nothing to do with it. There was no one aboard the train save the 3 men here, driver, engineer, and guard, and none of them had anything to do with the robbery." The 3 railwaymen looked at one another as though they had suddenly had revealed to them their entitlement to a joint fortune. "As for the thieves," said Holmes, "they are to be located somewhere nursing a hoard of bullion, apart, of course, from their paymaster, who is sitting here with us. Is that not so, Mr. Masterson?" Masterson blustered and steamed. He was outraged. This was absurd. "How dare you, sir? What evidence have you for such an outrageous suggestion?" "I had misgivings from the beginning. I could not understand why you came to me so quickly after the theft had been discovered when you had so much else to deal with. I see now that you were at pains to demonstrate to the insurance company that you were doing all in your power to recover the bullion because, of course, if you could have both the gold and the insurance money, you would have considerably augmented your fortune. But worse still, what your partners in crime would have done to Mr. Lyons, had he not had the good sense to fall asleep on the job, hardly bears thinking about. You were prepared not just to steal, but to be an accessory to murder." "This is speculation, Mr. Holmes. This would not stand up in court. You should be looking for another felon. What about that red silk ring?" "Ah, yes. You've been very subtle about that, Mr. Masterson, suggesting your wife's name one moment and the next assuring me that she could not possibly be implicated. I doubt whether you thought she would be, but you certainly sought to throw me off the scent. What was that item, if not a red herring? And is that not, for those who like to play games with words, another way to say a red herring? What fun you no doubt planned to have with that joke, Mr. Masterson, had you got away with this business. Now it seems the joke is on you. That was one pun, Mr. Masterson, which you would indeed have done better to have resisted. But whether justice was fully done is a moot point. In expectation of reducing his own sentence, Masterson eventually divulged the names of his accomplices and led police to the embezzled bullion. And although he was committed to prison for several years, it was clear that once his sentence was served, he would continue the life of a wealthy man. "I can't understand," I said to Holmes a couple of evenings later, "why you seem so damnably happy." "A man is never more content, Watson," he said, "than when doing well what his nature has fitted him to do. On which thought, will you pass me the tobacco pouch? I think we should indulge ourselves in a brace of good pipes." The Trinity Vicarage Larceny. One fine spring morning, Sherlock Holmes and I received into our rooms a portly gentleman in a purple dress. That at least is how it momentarily appeared to me, as I glanced up from the Daily Chronicle at the open door. The purple gentleman, it transpired, was the Right Reverend the Lord Bishop of Kent, an old acquaintance of Holmes, and he had brought with him, as so many of our visitors do, a problem that was clearly causing him some agitation. Mollified a little by coffee and a cigar, Bishop Spriggs needed no prompting to divulge his story. "The nub of my problem, gentlemen, is an unfortunate young priest. A young man of promise and talent, very popular with his parishioners, who has inadvertently got himself into deep water." "Intriguing," said Holmes. "You may recall," the clergyman continued, "that Trinity Church in the Kent village of Hetchingham was last year in the news because of an exceptional discovery." "Of course," I said. "A silver chalice of considerable worth was discovered in the crypt." "Yes, Dr. Watson. A magnificent medieval relic, the so-called Hetchingham Grail, weighing some 22 pounds. With my approval it was sold to the British Museum, with the idea that a good portion of the proceeds would go towards restoring Hetchingham Church. The Reverend Kingsley, pending the beginning of the building work, had locked the money up in the church crypt. It was stolen yesterday. Holmes, you can imagine what an outcry there'd be if this found its way into the papers. It would be bad for Kingsley and the Hetchingham parish, and goodness alone knows what it would do for the reputation of the church. At any cost, the money must be recovered and the thief put away. And I mean any cost, Holmes." "Let us not concern ourselves with fees just yet," Holmes said. "Are there any clues at all as to who might be responsible for this theft?" "I'm not sure about clues," replied the clergyman. "Kingsley did make some sort of an attempt to discover the identity of the villain by chasing him over the fields after the theft, but I'm afraid he didn't get very far." "I think we had better meet the young reverend," said Holmes, "as soon as is practical. Watson, would you be at liberty to accompany me to Hetchingham for a few days?" "I'm utterly indebted to you both," said the bishop. "I dare say while you're in Hetchingham we could put you up at the Trinity Church Rectory. Or there's the Jolly Bulldog, if you'd prefer an inn." "Ah," said Holmes, "the Jolly Bulldog. Now that sounds like just my kind of animal." We journeyed to Hetchingham the next morning and established ourselves at the cosy but crumbling hostelry that was the Jolly Bulldog. Our landlord was a bluff man called Starkey, taller by inches than Holmes, and compelled to stoop to avoid the beams of his own ceiling as he lumbered about in heavy boots serving his customers. He grudgingly provided us with a late snack of bread and some rather tough cold meats, complaining that if everyone chose to be fed at 2:30 in the afternoon, they would have to invent a new word for the meal taken between luncheon and dinner. "Leftovers," said Holmes to me impishly, and at a level which I am sure Starkey was meant to overhear, "might be that word?" The publican growled ominously as he left us, and I leaned over to Holmes and whispered, "There is surely an example of how a little power may go to the head of a man and make him too big for his boots." "I was thinking rather," said Holmes, "from the way he clumps about this place, that his boots are rather too big for him." I saw the two gentlemen on a nearby table smile at this remark. "I shouldn't take a lot of notice of Starkey," said one of them amiably. "He's just as tiresome with all the customers." The gentleman introduced himself as John Hapton, and his companion as Matthew Winslow. Although neither Holmes nor myself disclosed the details of our mission to Hatchingham, it seems they knew we were expected.